guys. So this video is going to just give a brief introduction into the life and works of the poet Elizabeth Bishop. So this is Elizabeth Bishop. You see a picture of her here. Bishop was born in 1911 and died in 1979. She is an American poet. She was born in Massachusetts in 1911, as I said. She spent some of her life living in Canada and about 15 years living in Brazil. When we're looking at Bishop's poetry, there is a number of features that we obviously have to look out for. Loneliness is a very, very common theme in her poetry. We also have her poetry tends to be very, very personal, highly personal poetry. She looks at nature a lot, and she looks at the concept of surviving life quite often in her poetry. Now, Bishop's life is very much, as I said, her poetry is very personal, so we do need to have a good understanding of where she's coming from and the life she lived. So a short biography of her. Bishop, she was born in Massachusetts in 1911. As an infant, her father died, and her mother, after her father's death, suffered a complete mental breakdown, and because of this was committed to a mental asylum in 1916. So we can see here a very, very difficult start to Bishop's life, in that she has lost both of her parents by the age of 5. It's going to have long-lasting effects. Because of the mental breakdown of her mother was stayed in the mental asylum for the rest of her life, and Bishop never actually saw her again. Even though her mother did live into the 1930s, Bishop never saw her. She never went to visit her. Okay. Instead, the way Bishop grew up was she was passed between a number of different family members, some more distant families. So she spent some time with each of her grandparents, with her maternal grandparents in Nova Scotia, which is a rural area in eastern Canada. And this seems to be a time when she was very, very happy. She seems to have gotten along very, very well with her maternal grandmother in particular, and seems to have enjoyed her time here. However, her paternal grandparents, or her father's parents, soon applied and won custody of Bishop. And in Bishop's words, they kidnapped her away. They took her away from her maternal grandparents, and she moved back to the US. However, she didn't stay there for the rest of her life. She did, in her teenage years, spend some time living with a maternal aunt, so her mother's sister, who helped to introduce her to poetry and was highly influential in her literary life. However, her life was still very difficult, and she has stated she was physically and sexually abused by one of her uncles as a young teenager. Okay, so we can see in Bishop's life a very, very disruptive and difficult family home life. She doesn't have much of a home, because she keeps being passed long distances between family members. She's been moved between countries and moved vast distances. This isn't just moving down the road. She's moved huge distances. When she does build up relationships of trust, she's either torn away, or then there's issues with other family members. And so family and trust, and even getting through surviving day by day is very difficult for her as a young person, and this comes up in her poetry a lot. Now, despite all this, she did quite well in school. She considered becoming a composer or a doctor, however eventually settled on becoming a professional poet. Bishop was a lesbian, and a number of her poems are written about the women that she fell in love with, in particular a woman named Lota, who was a great love for life and who Bishop moved to Brazil to be with. So we'll see in 1951, Bishop goes on a 2-week holiday to Brazil. While there, she meets up with Lota, who was a woman she had known before, an old friend. Bishop gets sick, and Lota cares for her, but they end up falling in love. And what had started as a 2-week holiday turns into Bishop moving and living in Brazil for the next 15 years. Now, even though she had these great loves, unfortunately, due to the time period she was living in, she couldn't openly write about or be blatant about being in love with another woman, because homosexuality wasn't accepted by society to a large extent. So she often writes, we'll see in her poetry, when she's writing about her love for women, sometimes they're called her friends or her companions or my dear friend, and things like that. Now, this is not to say that she was ashamed of her sexuality at all. She wasn't at all. She lived an open life as a lesbian woman. She just couldn't publish poetry in quite a blatant, professing homosexual love in such in a blatant way. It just wouldn't have made it through to publishers at the time. Despite all of her difficulties in life, she was very, very successful during her lifetime. She was highly accomplished. She was held in very high regard. She was given some very high positions in universities, and she was very much appreciated during her life. She, however, did also suffer frequently from depression and alcoholism, which added to some of the difficulties of her life. She passed away in 1979 of a cerebral aneurysm. So, common themes and writing traits that we need to be aware of. So these are just 3 main things we want to look out for in Bishop's poetry. First thing is that her poetry is highly personal. So we notice that she writes very personally about her life. She gives very deep insights into her thoughts, into her emotions. She expresses herself openly on the page. So, and while it may sometimes seem that she's speaking about other experiences, she may write about something that may seem inanimate. We can, when we read through the lines, notice that she is really speaking about her life and she's laying out her emotions and her experiences on the page to us. Loneliness is very, very central to her work. Now, it is really, really important to Bishop to be able to distinguish between the ideas of loneliness and aloneness. Okay? Being alone and being lonely. Right? Being alone simply means being by yourself. Right? It means not having other people physically around you. Loneliness is much more of an emotional state and means that you feel like nobody is there for you. Loneliness, you can feel lonely in a crowded room. You can feel like there's no one there for you. Right? You can be alone and not feel lonely at all. Right? You might be all, we're all alone. We're all, isolated from our friends at the moment. Doesn't mean we necessarily feel lonely all the time. Okay? So we need to understand Bishop actually seeks out solitude. She likes to be alone quite a lot, but she struggles with the idea of loneliness. And you can see this, when we look at her family life and how she grew up, why loneliness might be such an issue for her, because she just didn't have the structure that most people have growing up from their families. On top of this, she's also, we should be aware, she's very ahead of her time. So while some of what we look at now, it doesn't shock us in the modern world. For Bishop, writing in the time she was writing in, she's very much ahead of her time, and she challenged social conventions openly. So she, as we already said, she's openly gay. She also rejects the expectations of women at the time. So the expectation of women is to have a family and stay at home and take care of the family. She refuses to do this. Okay? She is out there, she's working hard. She doesn't, follow fashion trends and things like that. So she very much rejects what people expect of her. But she does this just her being herself. She's not doing this. She's not going out of her way to make statements. She's just acting her true life. She's being herself, and being herself just is a natural rejection of some of the social norms at the time. She, however, refuses to have her work included in women-only anthologies, and this shows how forward-thinking she is. That she doesn't. Her views on gender is that there can be equality of gender, and it doesn't have to be women's only. That she wants her work published alongside men and women. Right? She's also ahead of her time in terms of how she looks at nature. So I don't want to go into this too much detail now, but she does question when we travel and the effect of humans' activity on nature. And for her to be discussing this in the mid 20th century is very much ahead of what people would have expected. So we are very, very used to this kind of idea now. For Bishop to be discussing when she discussed it was very much ahead of her time. Okay, so that is just a brief outline of some of the things we're going to be looking at in terms of Bishop. Okay, you need to have this kind of background knowledge of what Bishop was like, what her life was like, and how that influenced her poetry when we're going to looking at it. Now, the task for today is to go and find out a bit more information yourselves. So there are 3 links here in front of you. I'll put them in the description of the video as well. I want you to choose one of these 3, any one of these 3, and go and read through it and really come to a good appreciation of Bishop yourselves.